Everything wrong with Survivor in Dead by Daylight. What's up, guys? Today we're going over 7 different main topics and my personal fixes for these problems. To start it off, I want to dive into all the Basekit buffs Survivor has seen recently. First up is Basekit BT being 15 seconds long. This change is super unnecessary and I really can't justify this length of time. There are ridiculous amounts of perks dedicated to anti-tunneling already in the game, and especially now that Decisive Strike is a common perk, I have no idea how this even happened. 10 seconds of endurance and haste off a hook was more than enough, especially without any killer compensation. And with how massive some of the maps in Dead by Daylight are and the ridiculous amounts of pallets on maps now, sometimes the only viable option is to tunnel. The problem I have is instead of behavior trying to fix these issues and disincentivize tunneling, they simply hardcore nerf tunneling. I wouldn't have such a problem with all the ways behavior tries to shut down killers finishing their objectives quickly if they would also prevent survivors from finishing their generators too quickly. Band-aid fixes are generally behavior's bread and butter, but that leads me into the next buff. The pallet density update was supposed to be a quality of life side grade, but really all it did was make Survivor and Chase even more mindless. Now, the baby Meg on your team who'd run to every pallet on the map dropping them isn't even a real hindrance, and she never has to improve at the game because there's so many pallets on the map it's impossible to get rid of all of them. I mean, this change just has to go. Third, we have 3 anti-camp features that removed killers' ability to grab survivors off hooks, added the ability for survivors to unhook themselves if the killer stayed nearby for too long, and increased survivors' hook timers to 70 seconds. I do understand that camping in Dead by Daylight is not fun for either party, but that's exactly why this change was so ridiculous. No killer who's actually trying to win ever wants to camp. The only time you would realistically ever see it happen is if a killer got someone into a 3-gen late game and would play for a proxy. But now even that is impossible, and that's one of the reasons in any respectable competitive setting the ability to unhook yourself is banned. And yes, there were some bubbas who would face camp with their chainsaw, but behavior has shown that they have the ability to nerf killers using their powers around hooks. So overall, all 3 of these changes combined is just simply too much. At minimum, they have to revert hook timers to 60 seconds. The 4th buff was the gen damage limit for killers. This change was implemented because of behavior's failure of a killer that was the Skull Merchant on release. Even the most skillless killer player could take teams to an hour-long match of Dead by Daylight, and this was absolutely a problem. But this was a flaw in only a few killers' designs and not a flaw in Dead by Daylight itself. I do think the gen damage limit just needs to be fully reverted to allow perks like Surge and Eruption to feel worth running on more killers. I think this change would see a lot more perk variety on the killer end, so behavior can stop nerfing pain resonance for no reason. And the final buffs I want to look at are the Survivor HUD and being able to see your teammates' perks. The HUD hardcore nerfs stealth killers and is a massive buff to Survivor. It makes it so injured survivors on generators aren't even actually risking anything wondering where the killer is. They can simply look at the HUD and see that a teammate's in chase, and the risk reward of a perk like Resilience is now non-existent. It's just reward. It also allows survivors to see without any aura reading which teammates should be unhooking. If you can see 2 of your teammates are halfway into a generator as you're walking to the next one, you know it's your job to unhook. There's no guessing. And building off that, our second topic is survivor coordination. People always seem to use the argument that Swift is so much stronger than solo queue, but after the HUD and being able to see your teammates' perks, that isn't really the case anymore. Solo queue has been brought up to almost the same strength as Swift. The only main difference is in Swift, you know your teammates are actually decent and playing the video game. Communication over Discord is definitely easier than playing around the ridiculous amounts of info you have access to in a match, but either way, with everything now available to Survivor, the difference really is tiny. With that said, I think at this point in Dead by Daylight, they should be balancing around Swift and not solo queue. Because of the insane amount of information survivors get, they should be able to make the correct decisions across the board after a short time of playing DBD. If behavior would simply push people to improve at the game instead of constant hand-holding, you would see a massive shift in the average skill level of the player base and just how much value there is to be had from all the changes they've made to solo queue play. And if they're gonna stand by their decision in implementing skill-based matchmaking, I think this is the only way to go. They need to stop babying survivors, force them to learn the game and to get value from everything they have access to instead of playing the game for them and watch the game thrive. Already, if survivors are split on 3 gens from the beginning while one player is being chased, the game becomes almost unwinnable for the majority of killers, and I think now has to be the time to stop the buffs. The next 2 topics are essentially one, but I wanted to talk about them separately because they have different solutions. First up is the egregious amount of second chance perks in Dead by Daylight. Survivors have access to 15 perks that give an extra health state that can get multiple uses throughout a game. When I say that out loud, it's so insane you probably don't believe me, but it's true. On top of this, survivors have the ability to take hits for teammates, on top of the fact that it can take an insane 6 hooks to kill a survivor potentially. A team running the strongest stuff in the game is almost immortal, which you can see when high-level survivors play without limits. This amount of extra lives on top of the Basekit Buffs to Survivor is absolutely absurd and needs to be looked into yesterday. I don't know how this was ever allowed to happen, especially seeing as there's no downside to any of these options. Can you guys imagine every time survivors did half a gen, the next time a killer hits a survivor by any means, they lose 2 health states? That is the state of these perks in Dead by Daylight, and if it was reversed, there would be riots at Behavior HQ. The second part of this topic is Exhaustion perks. Pop Goes the Weasel is a killer perk that has seen multiple nerfs, with the reasoning being it's too easy to activate. What about the perks that extend chases for 30 seconds for vaulting a window? Lithe and Sprint Burst specifically have been 2 of the top 5 most used perks for the past 10 years and have literally never been nerfed. Not one time. Unless you count the fact that when Dead by Daylight first released, Exhaustion didn't exist. They have been meta for a decade and have never been nerfed one time. I don't know a single killer who sees someone use Lithe and thinks, yep, they deserve that. I think these perks absolutely need a downside. When I first started playing Dead by Daylight, I played a bunch of Survivor with my friends. And when I tried Sprint Burst, I thought exhausted. That must mean I'm going to be slower when I'm exhausted. Nope. There is zero downside to a perk that mindlessly buys your entire team absurd amounts of time. You don't have to do anything to earn these perks, and they can activate an unlimited amount of times throughout a match. At least one of these things needs to change in 2026 Dead by Daylight if the Basekit Buffs somehow remain in the game, because the role is just getting way too out of hand. Another huge problem in DBD is how strong Survivor items are. When you look at the vast majority of killer add-ons in Dead by Daylight, at this point they give small effects that can help you here and there. Survivor items, again, either just give you a full extra health state or save over 20 seconds on a generator, which is just mind-boggling. A nerf somebody in my stream posed for these items was that the items you choose to bring in are blueprints, and you have to unlock a chest to actually have them in the match, which would solve 2 issues. 1, it would give Survivor another objective that they desperately need. And 2, if survivors don't go out of their way for these, you will no longer see medkits and toolboxes in every single match. Another idea I had personally was that toolboxes would be hardcore nerfed to generators, saving maybe 5 seconds at best, but remaining as ultra strong sabotage toolboxes that already exist in the game. Generators are already far too easy, and there are 16 perks in DBD that flat out increase gen speed, and I think there's no place for an item shaving off another 20% of a gen. Speaking of generators, that leads us into our next topic. Another huge issue for Survivor is how mind-numbingly easy it is to do a generator. Doing gens in DBD feels like woodcutting in RuneScape if you couldn't look away. Doing gens feels like you're waiting in line at the DMV. This shit has me feeling like I'd rather do my taxes. Not only is it super boring, but it's just so easy that adding something called skill checks to these generators is insulting to anyone who's ever done actually anything else. The main objective for Survivor is simply way too easy. Simplicity is good, but there needs to be some kind of curve to allow room for improvement. I believe the best way to fix both of these issues is to add actual interesting minigames to the generators that take some sort of time. My personal idea is a complete rework where you need to find the gas, open a panel and connect the wires, restore a part in the generator, install a control panel, and literally anything but holding left click, obviously with minimum times for completion. And I'd even be fine with some puzzle minigames just outright replacing the skill checks if they just made these things take any thought. For how much of an uphill battle Killer's main objective can be on the majority of the roster, I think it's only fair that the main objective of Survivor requires just a fraction of the neurons it requires to win Chase 12 times. And I really do think overall it would just improve the experience as a Survivor so much if the majority of your game isn't just super boring. And I really do think it's the reason that so many Survivors will end up having bad experiences in the game, and they'll just lash out and blame slugging or tunneling as what sucked the fun out of the match. I really do think if they required the Survivors to do anything interesting outside of being chased by the killer, the experience overall would just go up. And on top of that, while increasing the skill requirement for Survivor's main objective, I think Survivors need to be punished more for mistakes, which is our final topic of this video. Failing a skill check, which is basically only possible if you go for great skill checks, only nets a loss of 10% from the generator. If someone is paying any attention at all, they will basically never miss a skill check, and it's only 10%. On top of that, Survivors can mess up and chase up to 5 times without perks and still survive, which is an insane amount. If a killer messes up and chase a single time, it can cost them the game. So with this perspective, instead of the multitude of buffs Survivors get from perks rewarding them for being downed or hooked, I think Basekit there should be penalties to being hooked.
When will you learn that your actions have consequences?
thinking about it from a realistic standpoint, if a survivor had a massive meat hook shoved through their chest, they probably wouldn't be as efficient at doing generators. A 5% slower speed to doing any action off your first hook would be a strong incentive for killers to spread hooks and also stop behavior's trend of giving God mode to survivors for messing up. A second hook would increase this to 10% speed penalties to actions on top of making it take 10% longer to be healed by any means. I feel that not only would this be more immersive for survivors and realistic, it makes them really feel like they're creeping closer to dying, but it would incentivize killers to spread hooks out, stop generators from popping at the speed of light, and overall reward the killer for doing their job. So often in today's DBD are killers punished for doing what's required of them to win the game, and this would be my personal favorite change added to Dead by Daylight. I would love to see a lot of change in DBD, but I'm curious to see what you guys think.